Let's face it, there have been a lot of top 10 board game videos made by a lot of fantastic YouTube channels, but there's always been one problem. They weren't made by me. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that this is the greatest collection of board games ever made. If there were a top 10 list of top 10 board game videos, this one would be sitting at the top. Just a disclaimer, if you're standing, I suggest you sit down. And if you're sitting down, I suggest you lie down, because I will not be held responsible if you pass out watching this amazing video. First up on the list is kind of a deep cut. It's a 3 to 4 player game where players are stranded on a remote island and they need to build infrastructure and trade resources to survive. It's called Catan, and it's kind of the best possible combination of Monopoly and the game of life, which, spoiler alert, those will be coming up later in the video. But yeah, Catan is an awesome game. If you like asking your friends for sheep over and over again, this is going to be the game for you. I own 5 copies of it personally, just in case a group of 20 friends come over, and I want to make sure I have a copy for everybody. Don't worry, I'm just kidding. The actual 10th board game on the list is a game called Kemet. Kemet is a 2 to 5 player game that's an interesting combination of a dudes on a map war style game combined with a little bit of engine building. The engine building part comes in because you can buy these different tech tiles that can upgrade your armies in different ways. The red ones upgrade your attack, the blue ones upgrade your defense. The white ones are kind of economy tiles that give you more income to use to buy other tech tiles. It's actually a very interesting combination of different things you can do. And the best part for me is how aggressive this game is. If you don't like aggressive board games, you're probably not going to like Kemet because this game wants you to attack each other so bad. This game gives you points every time you attack someone and win. If you're defending and win a battle, nobody really cares unless you have a specific tech tile for it. But this game encourages you to get out on the map, attack each other, and kind of just have fun. I played this game a bunch, and it never really gets old. If you want to hop into a board game session and beat the crap out of your friends, this is the game for you. Number 9 on the list is The Quest for El Dorado. It's a 2 to 4 player game that involves deck building and racing. I'm a huge fan of deck building in general, so this game already kind of hits a sweet spot for me. And additionally, I would categorize this as a game that's a great gateway game. The rules aren't incredibly difficult to pick up, and it's actually a lot of fun for people that aren't normally into board games. If I'm trying to convince one of my friends that board games are kind of fun, this will usually be one that I try to pull out. The basic idea is you're trying to race across this map and be the first one to get to El Dorado. And the way you move across the tiles is you have to play different cards that match the tiles. The thing is, as you go, you can spend those same cards to buy upgraded cards from a shop. So there's kind of this balance you have to make of whether or not you just play those cards to move early, even though you'll be moving relatively less, or save those cards up, buy some expensive cards in the beginning, and then use those to race up ahead and catch up to the people that just started moving. It's a little bit more of an intricate balance than that, and there are some interesting cards that kind of change up the equation a little bit, but I love this game. I think it's a lot of fun. I played it a ton with my friends, and an interesting dynamic of this game is that you cannot pass somebody else that's sitting in front of you, and there can be some chokeholds in this game. And I've had situations where one of my friends will just sit in the opening and not move and block off everybody else. And of course, there is a way to get around, but that way around takes time. And as soon as they see somebody walk around and take the long way, then they start moving. There's definitely a little bit of room for trolling, but I love this game. I think it plays really well. And like I said, if you have someone that's newer to board games and you're trying to get them excited about it, this is the game to go for. Next up on the list is going to be a game you're familiar with if you follow the channel, and it's called Ark Nova. It's a zoo building board game. It plays 2 to 4 people, and this is the most complex game so far. Basically, the idea is you have all these different animal cards. There's like a gigantic deck of them. They're all unique. And you have to build a zoo, fill animals into that zoo to score points. There's 2 different types of points in this game. There's appeal that moves one way, and there's conservation that moves the other way. And they're moving in opposite directions. So once you get them to cross, that's when the end game begins. So there is a bit of engine building in some of the cards you can put down. The more animals you play, the more income you get. So you're definitely incentivized to get some good animals down. And there's these sponsor cards that give you some special abilities. There's just a whole lot of interplay. And the really interesting thing about this game is the action system. It's played with 5 different cards, all doing a different thing, but it's 5 basic actions. So you're not totally overwhelmed by all the things you can do. And there's 5 different strengths associated with each of those actions. So when you play one action, it'll move back down to the bottom. So in theory, you're incentivized to play the actions once they get to the top 5 strength because they're stronger at that level. But if you just keep doing that over and over again, you lose out on the efficiency of doing moves that would help you out more. So you kind of have to play this balancing game of, do I play the strongest cards at this time, or do I play the card that's going to help me out the most? And it actually becomes very thinky and a lot of fun. And an interesting part that mostly arises at the high levels is this dynamic at the end of the game where, remember how I said whoever crosses at the end is the one that initiates the end game? Once they cross, they don't have any other actions. So then every other player at the table gets one more action to finish off the game. And the winner is the person who crossed by the most. So there becomes this interesting cat and mouse dynamic where people will sit right on the line of crossing, but they want to build up this really powerful combination so that they can cross by a ton. I still haven't figured it out yet, but it requires a lot of long-term planning that I think is very crunchy and a really good time. And of course, if you're playing this game for the first time, it won't come up, but There's such a high skill ceiling in this game that it really benefits from a lot of playthroughs. So if you like a game that's simple on the surface but becomes very crunchy as you dive more into it, Ark Nova is going to be the one for you. Next up on the list is a game called Scythe, and technically it's 1 to 5 players. I've only played it 2 to 4, and it plays pretty good at all those levels. The idea of the game is it's this like 1920s steampunk kind of thing. I don't really know what to call it, but the art style is really cool. And the idea is there's kind of this engine building thing where you have to optimize your turns to build resources to generate these different mechs and upgrades to your units. And there's like a lot of stuff going on in the engine building side of things, but then there's also the combat side of things where once you build up these resources, you start moving out on the map with these different mechs and workers. You produce resources, you try to fight other people for control of areas, and it actually ends up being a very interesting combination of engine building and combat, which are two things that I like very much. And it gives players a lot of room to have their own playstyle. I play this game a lot with my friends, and it's interesting to see how people develop their strategies. One of my friends, for example, will usually just turtle up on their starting island, really get their economy going, and just once they're out on the map, they are really rushing out on the map and killing people. I tend to a more aggressive strategy. I try to get out my mechs early, I get out onto the field, and I just try to get in people's faces ASAP. And it's actually a kind of a funny interaction with the person that likes to turtle up, because if I'm fast enough, I get to the entrance of their island and now they can't leave. It actually gets them super frustrated and they've had to adapt their strategy to get around that. But gosh, this is such a fun game. I personally love every time I get to play this game. I think it's a ton of fun. The part that's a little bit of a downside is, and it's the reason I wouldn't get into this game competitively, it kind of has that chess dynamic where based on the combination of the faction you have and the player mat you have, there's an ideal sequence of moves to start out the game. And these are pretty long sequences of moves. And when you consider all the different combinations of mats and factions there are, it can be very overwhelming. So I'm not really trying to memorize all that. So I'll never get into the competitive side of this, but as a casual game with friends, I think this is an awesome experience. I would highly, highly recommend it. I don't think I'm going to blow up too many people's minds by saying Scythe is a good game. I think it's already pretty popular, but I really just want to reinforce how freaking fun this game is. Okay, so the next game I'm going to give is actually slightly a deeper cut. It's a 2-player game, and it's called Air, Land, and Sea. And the general idea is there's these 3 different theaters, and you have a hand of cards that you can play. And the turns go back and forth where you play a card, your opponent plays a card, back and forth, back and forth. Every card has a number on it that corresponds with that card's strength. And they have some special abilities as well. The idea is you want to have the higher power in 2 out of the 3 different theaters of war. If you're able to do that, you win the round. The interesting thing is, though, as those turns are going back and forth and you're playing your cards against your opponent, at any point you decide, hey, I'm not going to win this, you can give up. And the game incentivizes you to give up if you think you're going to lose, because the earlier you give up, the fewer points you give to your opponent for winning the round. So it almost becomes a kind of bluffing game where if you have a really bad hand, you want to make it look like you're really strong so your opponent gives up. But if you have an insanely strong hand, you kind of want to play it close to the chest to keep them in the game longer so that you can print more points out of them. And the thing is, the way the cards are designed, this is not a straightforward approximation at all. It's often very hard to tell if you're going to win or lose just based off of the early initiating sequences. So it's a really fun game that's incredibly simple to teach. And it's actually a game I play a lot with one of my friends that's not that interested in board games. It's one of the ones that's been able to capture his attention the most. So if you have a friend like that that's like kind of wishy-washy on games, but they like the idea of them, I think this is a really fun game to try out. Okay, next up, game number 5. And I felt like I had to include a game like this just because this ends up being a majority of the games I play because I play with a lot of casual friends, and it's Codenames. You've probably heard of this game before. I don't feel the need to go super into detail about it, but basically there's 2 teams. There's a clue giver on each team, and you have to give a clue, and you have to give a 1-word clue with a number, connecting all of these different words on the board. So let's say I give the clue dog 2. If there's a word canine and, I don't know, bone, maybe they would guess those, but maybe there's a 3rd word on the board and it's fur. If that word is the black word, if your team guesses it, you lose. So you kind of need to dodge your opponent's clues and the black word while also getting your team to guess your words. And it's a ton of fun. It's pretty much a universal hit whenever I bring it out, and I have a lot of friends over. And I think it's important to have one of these games in your collection so that if you have some people coming over, you have something you can pull out. Other games that kind of fall into this category for me, I think Taboo is a lot of fun. Monikers is excellent. And if you're a fan of social deduction games, The Resistance Avalon is awesome. I just feel like it would be a crime to leave these kind of games off the list. Codenames is just so much fun. I play it all the time when I have a certain group of friends over, and it really never gets old. Okay, now we're getting into the juicy games. And at number 4, I have Blood Rage. And basically, you're playing as these different Viking clans at the end of the world, Ragnarok. And this game is a really fun combination of card drafting and a dudes on a map kind of combat game. It plays out over 3 rounds, and the cards can drastically change what your different units are able to do. And it lets you build up a lot of different fun strategies. Like there's this one strategy, for example, I think it's kind of notorious for being very strong, but there are cards that let you get points when your units die. I think they're called the Loki cards. So if you really want to play into this, you just keep drafting those kind of cards. You keep going into battle, intending to lose the battles so that you can send all of your units to Valhalla. And then you just print points off of that. There's other strategies as well that revolve around different mechanics, and the cards do a lot of interesting things. Also, of course, there are these giant monsters that have some awesome abilities, like this troll that will come down and just destroy all the units in an area. The interactions are incredibly fun. It ends up being a very close game right up to the end a lot of the times because there are a lot of different strategies that pay out different rewards at different times. It's a deeper level game without being overly burdensome with how complex it is, and it's just a lot of fun. I highly recommend it if you haven't played it before. Okay, next up on my list is game number 3, and I feel kind of lame for putting such popular games in my top 10 list, but they're just so much fun. It's kind of hard to justify not putting them in there, and it's Gloomhaven. Specifically, the digital version of Gloomhaven. I've never played the physical game. The physical game seems like a nightmare, honestly. It seems like there's so much setup and stuff to keep track of, and just playing through the digital version, I have no idea how they keep track of all these different things. There's like a million items in the game. You can update your deck as you go. There's different upgrades on stuff. It seems like an administrative nightmare, honestly. And just setting up the game seems like it would take forever. If you're not a hardcore board game person and you don't have similarly hardcore friends to play Gloomhaven physical edition with, the digital edition is awesome. It takes all of the administrative work out of the way. It's so easy to boot up and play with people. I've recently started playing this with a group of friends, and we just have so much fun playing it. Basically, there's a story element where you're doing all these different quests. You go into dungeons and you try to beat them. You have some really powerful cards in your deck, and you can build up your deck as you go. And your deck is what gives you different options as you play through the dungeon. And there's this interesting mechanic wherein some of the cards, you can burn them, aka destroy them in that battle, to get a stronger effect out. The downside is the more cards you burn, the less cards you have available as you go. And every time you run out of cards in that deck, you have to burn one to refresh your other cards. So there's this really scary dynamic where you're burning through your deck. And if you run out of cards to play, you become exhausted and that character dies. So you need to conserve your cards while also moving quickly enough to beat the dungeon in a time frame so that you don't just run out of cards through a slow like burnout mechanism. There's a ton of different factions to play. There's a rogue, there's a spellcaster, there's pretty much anything you could want. And as you go, each of your characters has a personal quest. And once you complete that quest, you unlock a newer, stronger character. So there's a reason to keep playing through the game. There's all these new interesting things to explore, and it's really easy to hop on an online game and play with your friends. So I've been thinking about maybe making some content for it as well. Maybe I could do a solo playthrough. If there's interest, I'll do it. If not, probably won't, but I love this game. I got hooked immediately, and if a long form game like this appeals to you, absolutely check it out. It's not even that expensive. Okay, we're on to number 2, my second favorite board game of all time. And it's kind of funny I bring this one up because I made a video about No Rules Barred where I talk about how compelling it is when they sold this game, and it lives up to the hype so much. It's a game called Nemesis. Basically, you and a couple of friends are astronauts on this ship. You've been in deep sleep while you wait for your ship to get to its location, but suddenly you wake up, you come out of the pods. You don't know what's going on. You have this kind of amnesia, so you don't remember where any of the rooms are. And your goal, explore the ship, make sure you're on track to go to Earth, that your engines are working, and you either have to go back to sleep or escape from a pod. The part where this game kicks you in the teeth, however, are the intruders or the aliens. They'll pop up as you move around the ship making noise, and they are brutal to fight. A lot of the times I'll end up running away from them, but sometimes you just gotta stand and fight. Everybody has their own secret objective card, whether or not you have to send some kind of signal, whether you have to obtain one of these eggs and escape, and some of the cards have you betray your friends. So it's a semi-cooperative game where some people are working with you and some people working against you. Can you trust that your friend said engine number 2 is working? Or do you have to go and double check it yourself? Are you really heading to Earth or are you heading to deep space? That social deduction element combined with how difficult it is to complete your objective makes this game so much fun. This game is just a storytelling machine. I have some of the best memories of board gaming playing Nemesis. That moment when someone you trusted betrays you, when you get that last hit on the alien so you can finally escape, or when you don't and you die and you have to root for your other friends to get off the ship. I love this game. It's super expensive, but luckily there is a tabletop simulator version where you can try it out for free, and that's usually the version I play on as well. You should 100% check it out if you haven't. I think it's a ton of fun, and it deserves the title of a board game masterpiece. Perfection. Okay, the moment has come. My number 1 game of all time, and if you follow the channel at all, this is not going to be a surprise to you. I love this game. Pretty much all of the content on my channel is about this game. It's Dune Imperium. specifically with the Rise of X expansion, which makes the game 10 times better. I actually wouldn't recommend playing this game without the expansion. I think it's way more fun with it. So the general gameplay is it's a 1 to 4 player game, but I'd recommend playing it at 3 to 4 players. It's a deck building worker placement game set in the Dune universe. The first player to get the 10 victory points wins the game, and every victory point you get just feels so impactful, so important. You see your opponents climbing up that track, and you know that you have to get something done if you want to catch up. There's a lot of short-term strategy where you have to think about the best way to play out your one turn, but also there's long-term planning where you're building out your deck to score you as many points as possible. There's so many different ways to win. You can go for a deck building strategy. You can go for a combat strategy. You can just draw a million of these mystery cards, also known as intrigue cards, that give you special benefits. I have played this game so many times, and I'm still excited to just boot up a game and play. There's so much replayability, and every game just feels so unique. The Rise of X expansion adds this technology track that can upgrade your engine in a bunch of different ways. There's a new shipping track. Everything they added in that expansion is gold. They recently added a new expansion called Immortality as well. I'm a little bit up on the fence for it. I think this one's a little bit more optional. It just adds a ton new cards and a new track that adds a ton of variability to the game, but I don't know if it makes it a lot better necessarily. I think it's good if you've played a lot of Rise of X and you want to add some excitement into the game again. But otherwise, I think Dune Imperium plus Rise of X is the real sweet spot for me, and I can't recommend it enough. If you want to see more Dune Imperium content, it's what my channel is about, and you can look through the videos and pick one that interests you. I'll even one linked at the end for you. Well, that's my top 10 board game list. If you have any suggestions for games that you think I might be interested based on that list, please suggest them. I'm always looking for new games to play, and have a good one.